Okay, so the Inca Empire ran the largest state in the ancient Americas, millions of people spread across 2 million square kilometers of mountain, and it did it with no coins, no cash, and almost no buying and selling, no money, no markets, no prices, just an empire of millions, running on something you cannot spend. Sounds simple. It is not simple. And the story of how that economy actually worked, and how it died, is one of the strangest stories in all of history. By the end, you will understand what the Inca were really running, and why the greatest treasure in the Americas was never the gold. Before we get anywhere, you need the problem that shaped everything about this place. Try to move anything in the Andes. There were no horses, because there were no horses in the Americas before the Spanish arrived. No oxen, no carts, no wheels at all. A llama, the largest thing the Inca could pack, carries about 25 kilograms, a little more than a heavy suitcase, and the trails it walks are some of the steepest terrain on Earth. So everything that mattered had to be carried, on feet and on backs, up switchbacks where the air gets thin and the cold gets sharp. You cannot truck grain across a mountain range. You cannot ship anything. So if you want an empire here, you cannot feed it by moving food around. You have to feed it where the food is grown, by people who live there. And that means the whole economy has to work differently from anything you and I grew up with. This is the constraint that built the strangest economy in the ancient world. Start with the ground itself. In the Inca world, you did not buy land and you did not sell it. The land belonged to the community, the extended family group called the Iluo, and the community handed out plots to each household based on how many people it needed to feed. When a family line ended, the plot went back to the community and got handed out again. No real estate, no price per acre. The first Europeans who wrote this down described a three-way split. A third of the land worked for the emperor, a third for the priests of the sun, and a third for the people themselves. That description is probably the tidy version of a messier reality, but the shape of it is what matters. What you owed the state was not goods, it was time. A share of your working year, owed to the empire, spent on the emperor's fields, on roads, on storehouses, on whatever the state needed done. That is the tax, not coins, not grain, not a bill that arrives in the mail. Time, your hands and your back for a set number of days, every year. That is the engine the entire empire ran on. Now here is the thing about a tax paid in labor. It scales in a way money never does. The Inca took the old Andean habits of helping neighbors, the small exchange of work called Aini, the communal working bee called Minka, and built an empire-sized version of it called the mita, a rotating draft that pulled a share of every household's working year into state projects. Road crews, terrace walls, storehouses, mines, the armies, the relay runners who carried messages. There were dozens of different kinds of mita, each one a different slice of the year owed to a different job. This is not a metaphor. When the state needed a road built, it did not hire anyone. It counted the households in a region, assigned them their weeks, and the work happened. And here is the honesty part. Because this system could be heavy, it was an obligation, not a favor. Some groups were permanently relocated to new lands as colonists, expected to rebuild their lives where the state wanted them. Some people served the state for life. It is easy to romanticize a system like this from 500 years away, and it is just as easy to flatten it into pure slavery. The truth is in between, and it matters, because the state backed its promise of reciprocity with something real. Which brings us to the strange heart of the whole thing. All that labor, all those working days, went somewhere. And the somewhere is the part that sounds almost like science fiction. The empire built storehouses, not a shed behind the palace, thousands of them. At one single site, Huánuco Pampa in the highlands of Peru, archaeologists have counted more than 4,000 storehouse buildings, a whole city of round stone granaries sitting in neat rows across a hillside. Inside them, maize, potatoes, freeze-dried potatoes that keep for years, dried meat, textiles, tools, everything a worker, a soldier, or a starving village could need. Now stop and think about what that actually is. The empire's treasury was not a vault of gold. It was a mountain of food. When you worked your mita weeks on the emperor's fields, the harvest went into those buildings. When a soldier marched, he ate out of them. When a bad year hit a village, the storehouse doors opened. The labor you paid in time was converted into calories, and the calories were stored, and the storage was the wealth. You cannot move wealth across the Andes, and there is no money to move anyway. So instead of moving wealth, the Inca stored it where the people were, and the people came to it. The storehouse was the bank account, and the account was measured in meals. Now watch how the food actually gets into those buildings, because the timing is everything. The Inca calendar ran on the harvest. When the emperor's fields came in, the mita weeks had already been assigned, and the crop was carried from the field to the storehouse by the same hands that had planted it. The freeze-dried potatoes, called chuno, could keep for years, which meant a good year in one valley could feed a bad year in another, so long as the harvest got counted and stored before the rains came. The whole system ran on that rhythm. The labor arrived, the food went in, the records got made, and the doors closed until someone with authority opened them again. Every single one of those steps needed the state, and that is the part that matters, because the food did not belong to the village that grew it. It belonged to the empire, and the empire kept the books on all of it. But here is the question that makes or breaks this whole thing. If the treasure is food and the food sits in thousands of buildings spread across thousands of kilometers, how do you know what is in any of them? How does an empire with no written language keep track of 1,000,000 meals? The answer is the single most underrated invention in the Americas. It looks like a bundle of colored string with knots in it. It is called the quipu, and it was the empire's spreadsheet. The Inca had no writing, no numbers on paper, but they did not need either. The quipu was a set of cords, each one carrying a record, with knots tied at different heights and positions that encoded numbers, and the colors and structure of the cords encoded what was being counted: people, storehouses, harvests, troops, herds, tribute owed. The empire ran its censuses and its inventories on knotted string, kept by a class of specialist readers whose whole job was to hold the empire's numbers in their heads and hands. We cannot read those cords today, not fully, and that part is worth being honest about. But we know enough to see what the system was. When a quipu recorded a harvest, the harvest had an owner, the state. When it recorded a census, the census had a purpose, obligation. The quipu was the ledger, and the ledger was the machine. Take the ledger away, and you have food in warehouses and no idea who owes what to whom. Hold the ledger, and you hold the empire. Now watch the machine actually spend its money, because this is where the whole thing either holds together or falls apart. Somewhere in the highlands, a road crew finishes a long day of digging in stone. The state feeds them. That is the payroll. A garrison in a far province gets a delivery of dried meat and maize, tracked on a quipu, logged against the province's obligation. That is the transfer. A village that lost its crop to an early frost walks to the storehouse, and the doors open. That is the safety net. And when a lord wanted to keep a province loyal, he threw a feast, and the feast came out of the storehouses too. This is the deal the empire ran on. Your time, my protection. Your harvest in the bad year because I fed you in the good ones. The workers got fed, the soldiers got clothed, the loyal got feasted, and the hungry got fed when the crop failed. That is how the machine spent what it stored. And it worked because the state actually delivered, most of the time. It is also where the system's dark side lived, because the same machine that fed a starving village could demand a family's young people and send them to a mine on the other side of the empire. The ledger did not care about the cost to one household. It only cared about the balance, and the balance was enormous. This is the part that makes the whole thing genuinely astonishing, because the machine did not just feed itself, it built the greatest road system in the ancient Americas, more than 30,000 kilometers of engineered road, 2 main routes running the length of the empire and a web of transverse links tying it all together, with way stations stocked with food every few hours of travel. It built terraces that turned mountainsides into farmland, carved into slopes so steep that you can still see them holding today. It built entire cities of storehouses, like the 4,000 granaries at Huánuco Pampa. And it did all of this without a single wheel, without a single animal to pull a load, without a single coin changing hands. All of it was time. All of it was the mita, the labor draft, converted into stone and soil and stored food. That is the scale of what you are looking at. An economy with no currency that outbuilt every other society in the Americas. Now picture the other thing those roads carried. A message the empire ran on relay runners, the casci, stationed at way stations along the routes. A message passed from hand to hand, each runner sprinting his stretch of road before handing it to the next. The chroniclers claimed a message could cross the empire in days, and whatever the real number was, the point is the same. No riding, no horses, just a man running, a bundle handed over, and the next man gone. That is how fast the machine could think. And here is the detail worth holding on to. The runners only ran because the way stations fed them, and the way stations were fed by the same storehouses that answered to the same hand. The speed of the machine and the fragility of the machine were the same thing. A command could cross 1,000 kilometers in days. A command could also stop crossing entirely, the moment the hand that gave it was gone. Which brings us to the gold. Because here is the thing everybody remembers, and the thing that is almost completely beside the point. The Inca had gold everywhere. Temples lined with it, royal regalia made of it, Golden objects so numerous that the first Europeans who saw them could barely describe them, and none of it was money. You could not buy a meal with a gold plate, not because the plate was worthless, but because there was nothing to buy. There were no shops. There was no market where you took your gold and walked out with food. The food came from the storehouses, and the storehouses were opened by the state, and the state was not interested in your gold. Gold was ornament. Gold was ritual. Gold was the costume of power, the thing that made the emperor look divine. The actual cash of the empire, the thing that made everything work, was the stored food and the promised labor. When you look at a golden Inca treasure, you are looking at the empire's jewelry. When you look at a row of storehouses, you are looking at the empire's bank. And the gold was the decoy. The treasure everyone has spent 500 years obsessed with was the least important part of the economy. So, if the engine is food and labor, and the ledger is string, what could possibly break a machine this good? This is where it gets dangerous. Think about what the whole system depends on. The labor gets recorded, the food gets stored, the state redistributes it, and all of it moves according to one set of books, one authority, one hand holding the ledger. The emperor, formally, the emperor, owned everything. All the land, all the labor, all the storehouses. Practically, the whole machine answered to him and to the bureaucracy that ran in his name. It ran through the local lords, the caracas, who counted the households, assigned the mita weeks, and reported to the capital. Formal ownership and practical control were two different things, and the empire needed both. The quipus reported to the capital, the storehouses opened on imperial command, the redistribution ran through the emperor's authority. That is the structural risk, and it is hiding in plain sight. This empire built its entire economy on a single point of failure. There was no independent trading class underneath, no merchants with their own wealth, no market that would keep going if the palace stopped. The whole economy was one giant ledger, and the ledger had one set of hands. And here is the misleading part, because the machine could look completely healthy right up until it was not. Full storehouses, stocked way stations, busy roads, a census that showed millions of obligations met. Every visible sign of a working economy could be true, and the whole thing could still be one capture away from stopping, because none of those signs lived anywhere except in the ledger, and the ledger lived in one place. A full storehouse was not the same thing as strength, it was the same thing as a promise, and the promise was only as good as the hand that could open the door. That is the trap hiding behind the impressive numbers, and nobody saw it until the hand was gone. And the machine had a second dependency hiding behind the first. It needed expansion. Each new province the Inca conquered brought a new pool of labor into the system, new hands for the mita, new harvests for the storehouses, new land to draw from. The promises the state made, the feasts, the protection, the storehouse doors that opened in the bad year, all of that had to be funded. And when the conquests slowed down, the promises did not get smaller. They just had to be funded by squeezing the provinces that already existed. The engine did not just like expansion, it needed it, the way a fire needs fuel. And on top of that, there was a quiet bill that never went away. Even in peace, the machine had to keep paying its overhead. The roads had to be maintained. The way stations had to stay stocked. The storehouses had to be staffed and guarded, year after year, whether anything was happening or not. Peace did not mean the machine rested. It meant the machine kept paying. Now, keep all of that in your head, and come to a plaza in the north of Peru in the year 1532. A small Spanish force has captured the emperor, Atahualpa, in a surprise attack. He is a prisoner in his own empire, and to buy his freedom he makes a promise. He will fill one room with gold, and 2 more rooms with silver. Think about what he is asking his empire to do. No trucks, no banks, no coinage. And yet the gold came. From every corner of the empire, carried by runners and llama trains and human backs, following the roads the mita had built, tracked by the quipus, the gold arrived and the room filled. In months, a moneyless economy, with no currency, produced a fortune on demand, because the machine did not need money to mobilize wealth. It needed authority. The emperor spoke, and the whole network moved. That is the empire at full power, and you should be impressed, because it is genuinely astonishing. And then the payoff. And this is the part that makes the story worth telling. The gold was handed over, and they killed him anyway. In July of 1533, Atahualpa was executed, and the machine, the one that had just moved a fortune across a mountain range, stopped. Here is what actually happened, and it is not what the history books make it look like. The empire did not fall because the Spanish were better at fighting. It cracked first. A few years earlier, disease had come ahead of the armies, probably smallpox, and it killed the emperor's father, Huánuco Pampa, and with the head of the system gone, the empire split in two. 2 brothers, Atahualpa and Huáscar, fought a civil war for the throne, while the machine sat without its single hand on the ledger. That is the first crack. The Spanish did not break a healthy empire. They walked into one that was already shattered at the exact place it could not afford to be shattered, at the top, and then they captured the survivor. And with the emperor gone, the whole economy froze. Now picture the freeze, because it is the part nobody talks about. The redistribution stopped, which means the roads stopped being fed, which means the garrisons stopped being fed, which means the army could not march. The feasts stopped. The storehouse doors that opened in the bad year stayed shut. A village that lost its crop and walked to the storehouse found the doors closed, because nothing moved without the word from the center, and the center was a prisoner. The quipu readers had no orders to read. The relays stopped running. The roads emptied. The machine did not get conquered. It got unplugged. Then the Spanish, who could not read the quipus and did not understand the system, did what conquerors do. They took the gold, which was the thing they valued, and they burned the records, the censuses, the inventories, the tribute rolls, the whole memory of the machine, gone in fire. And nobody could run it after that. Not the Spanish, who had no key to the ledger and no standing in the reciprocity. Not the people who had watched their emperor die and their world come apart. The economy that had fed millions dissolved in a generation. The population collapsed with it, and the gold that everyone remembers, the gold the Spanish fought over and melted down, was never the engine. It was the costume. The engine was the food and the obligation, and it was dead. Now step back and look at the machine's whole checklist, because this is where the story stops being a tragedy and becomes a lesson. For the system to keep working, 3 things had to stay true. The center had to stay whole. Expansion had to keep feeding the promises, and the ledger had to keep being read. As long as all 3 held, the machine was nearly unstoppable, and you can see it in the ransom, a fortune mobilized on command. Now look at what happened. The center died of disease, the expansion ran into the Spanish, and the ledger was burned by people who could not read it. 3 conditions, all true at once, all gone at once. That is not coincidence. That is what a system with a single point of failure looks like when it finally gets hit. So, does that mean the whole thing was doomed from the start? Honestly, it depends on the conditions, and the conditions are specific. This system worked brilliantly inside its own world. It worked because there were no wheels, no draft animals, no way to ship wealth around, which meant the answer had to be local storage and centralized command. It worked because one authority could keep the books, open the doors, and make the promises. And it worked because expansion kept feeding the machine. Under those conditions, the Inca built the largest state in the ancient Americas, fed millions, moved armies, and fortunes, all without a single coin. It is one of the most successful economic machines ever built. But the conditions were also the weakness. The moment the center stopped, everything stopped. The moment expansion slowed, the promises got harder to fund. And the moment the ledger died, the wealth died with it. A market economy can survive the capture of a king, because the trade is spread across a million hands. This economy could not survive the capture of one man, because the trade was concentrated in one hand. That is the structural truth underneath the whole story. The Inca did not run an economy without money. They ran an economy whose money was stored food and recorded obligation, and they held all of it in one place. And when that place fell, the money did not just change hands, it evaporated. So, the next time you picture the Inca Empire, picture the gold. Sure, everyone does. But then picture the other thing. Picture 4,000 storehouses on a hillside, packed with food that could feed an army or a starving village on the emperor's word. Picture the cords with their knots, holding the count of every harvest and every household in a single hand. Picture the road crew eating after a day of stone, the village fed in the bad year, the feast that kept a province loyal. And picture the empire that moved a fortune across a mountain range on foot, not because it had money, but because it had something better, a people who owed their time and a system that remembered every hour. That is what the Inca were really running, not a treasury of gold, a treasury of food, a ledger of string, and an empire that was alive exactly as long as one hand held it.